the real story of a man who lost everything in a divorce at 52 and rebuilt it. In the autumn of 2019, a man we'll call Martin sat in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building he had never been to before and signed his name to a document that transferred half of everything he had ever built to a woman he had been married to for 22 years. He drove home alone. He had a studio apartment now. The lease started Monday. He was 52 years old. This is not a story about who was right. It is not a story about fault or blame or the particular sequence of events that leads a 22-year marriage to a conference room on the 14th floor. This is a story about what happened to Martin's money and what he did about it. Pay attention, because the numbers are going to surprise you. Watch till the end and kindly subscribe, share, comment, and like this video. Before we get to Martin, I want to give you one number, not as a warning, not as a headline, as a frame for everything that follows. According to research from the Journal of Sociology, the average man's net worth declines by approximately 77% in the year following a divorce. Yes, 77%, not 77% of a bad year, not 77% of a rough stretch, 77% of everything a man has accumulated up to that point in his life. Now sit with that for a moment, because most people hear that number and think it applies to other people. Martin thought that too. Martin was wrong, and if you are watching this right now, there is a very real chance that you are making the same assumption Martin made, which is precisely why we are here. Martin was, by most external measures, a success story. He had started as a mid-level manager at a logistics company at 28. By 35, he was a regional director. He was not rich, not by the definitions that get thrown around in finance content, but he was solidly, quietly comfortable. He and his wife owned a 4-bedroom house in a suburb of a mid-sized American city. They had 2 children, both of whom were through university by the time the marriage ended. He drove a 5-year-old truck. He took 1 holiday a year. He did not think about money very much, which is itself a form of financial privilege he did not fully appreciate until it was gone. By 52, Martin's financial picture looked like this. Home equity, $380,000. Purchase price $290,000, paid down over 19 years. 401k, $340,000, consistent contributions since age 31. Joint savings account, $62,000, the emergency fund they had promised themselves. They would top up every January and rarely did. His truck, valued at $18,000. Total net worth approximately $800,000. He was not a wealthy man, but he was a man who had spent 22 years building something real. The part that did not appear on any balance sheet was what Martin thought that $800,000 represented. He thought it meant he was on track, that if he kept working until 62, contributed consistently, and the market did roughly what markets do, he would have somewhere between $1.4 million and $1.7 million by the time he stopped working. He was not wrong about the math. He was wrong about the assumption underneath it. The assumption was that nothing would change. The marriage did not end suddenly. Most do not. It ended the way many long marriages end, gradually, then completely. There is no financial lesson in the reasons. What matters, for our purposes, is the sequence of events that followed the decision. Martin and his wife agreed, at first, to try mediation. This is worth noting because mediation, when it works, is significantly cheaper than contested litigation. When it does not work, and in Martin's case it did not, primarily over disagreements about the house, it simply delays the more expensive process. By the time Martin retained an attorney, he had already spent 11 weeks and approximately $8,000 on a mediation process that produced no agreement. The attorney, who came recommended by a colleague, was not inexpensive. She charged $425 an hour. Average legal fees per person in a contested divorce. American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. Martin's total legal fees came to $34,000. This is the first number most men do not see coming. Not because it is hidden from them, because they are in a state of emotional upheaval that makes it genuinely difficult to process the concept that the administrative cost of ending a marriage separate from anything that gets divided, will itself be a significant five-figure sum. The second number Martin did not see coming was the tax bill. His 401k held $340,000. Under the divorce settlement, his wife was entitled to half, $170,000. To transfer that half, their attorneys prepared a qualified domestic relations order, which is the legal instrument that allows a retirement account to be divided in divorce without triggering immediate tax penalties. Martin knew about the QDRO. What Martin did not fully appreciate was that his wife, upon receiving her $170,000, elected to take it as a cash distribution rather than roll it into her own retirement account. This was her legal right. It was also not Martin's problem, legally. It became his problem emotionally because the woman he had spent 22 years with had just paid a tax bill of roughly $45,000 on money they had saved together, and the knowledge of that sat in Martin's chest for considerably longer than it had any reason to. Martin's own $170,000 remained in his 401k. This is important. Hold that number. The house was sold. After paying off the remaining mortgage and splitting the equity, Martin received $187,000 from the sale. His share of the joint savings account, $31,000. His truck, which he kept, $18,000. Let us now look at what Martin walked out of that conference room with. 401k remaining, $170,000. Cash from home sale, $187,000. Half the savings account, $31,000. Truck, $18,000. Legal fees paid minus $34,000. Total net worth approximately $372,000. He had lost $428,000 in a single year. Not to bad investments, not to a failed business, not to any decision he made on any given morning, when he could have chosen differently, to a legal process. That is 53.5% of his net worth, not 77%, not yet. The 77% would come from what Martin did next. Here is where Martin's story becomes less unusual and more instructive, because what happened in the 12 months after the divorce was finalized follows a pattern that appears in the research with enough frequency to constitute something approaching a rule. Martin was not reckless. He was not a man who went out and bought a sports car. He was not, to use the technical term, stupid about it. He was simply not careful. There is a difference. Recklessness is a decision. The absence of care is a state. And Martin, in the year after his divorce, was simply not in a state that made careful financial management possible. His housing costs doubled overnight. The marital home had cost him, after mortgage and utilities, approximately $1,800 a month. His studio apartment cost $1,650. This sounds better until you remember that the marital home was split two ways. He was now paying $1,650 for a studio. Alone. He ate out more than he should have. Not extravagantly. He was not dining at places with cloth napkins and a wine list. He was eating alone at the kind of restaurant that doesn't require a reservation, which is a specific and quiet form of financial drain that adds up to approximately $400 a month if you are not paying close attention, and Martin was not paying close attention. He updated his wardrobe. Not dramatically. Just enough to feel, in some small way, that he was starting again. $2,200 over 3 months. He bought a used road bike because someone at work had told him that cycling had helped them through a difficult time, and Martin thought that was probably true. The bike cost $900. Martin rode it 4 times. None of these decisions was unreasonable on its own. All of them together, across 12 months, amounted to approximately $22,000 in spending that Martin would not have incurred had he been living his previous life. $22,000, average excess spending by men in the first 12 months post-divorce, compounded over 10 years at 7%, $43,300 in lost wealth. And then there was the $60,000. The $60,000 is the part of Martin's story that he would later describe as the decision he wishes he could undo more than any other. In the spring of 2020, 18 months after the divorce was finalized, Martin received a call from a man he knew from his previous life a friend of a friend, the kind of connection that exists at the periphery of a long marriage and suddenly becomes more central when the marriage disappears. This man had a business idea, a distribution business. Martin understood distribution. Martin had spent 24 years in logistics. The idea was not obviously bad. Martin knew enough to know it was not obviously bad. He invested $60,000 from his cash reserves. The business failed in 14 months. Martin recovered none of it. Let us now look at where Martin stood 2 years after the divorce was finalized. 401k, $170,000. No contributions in 18 months. Cash flow was too tight and he had suspended them. Remaining cash, $148,000, $187,000, minus $60,000, minus $22,000 in excess spending, minus the $34,000 emergency fund he had rebuilt to a thin $3,000. Savings account, $3,000. Truck, $15,000, depreciated. Total net worth, approximately $166,000. He had started at $800,000. He was now at $166,000. That is a decline of 79%. He had arrived through a combination of legal process, reasonable human responses to an unreasonable year, and one genuinely avoidable investment decision at the exact number the research predicted. Martin was 54 years old, and he had less money than he had at 31. The man who had been on track to retire comfortably at 62 was no longer on track to retire at all. The turning point in Martin's story was not a dramatic moment. It was not a conversation that changed his life, or a book that rewired his thinking, or a morning he woke up and decided to be different. It was a Sunday afternoon in November 2021. Martin was sitting at the table in his studio apartment, a nicer apartment now he had moved, and he was doing something he had been avoiding for almost 2 years. He was looking at the actual number, not the approximate number, not the rough sense of where he stood. The actual number on a piece of paper with each item listed and a total at the bottom, $166,000. He sat with that number for a long time. What he told himself in that moment, and this is the part of Martin's story that matters most, was not, "I have failed." It was not, "I am too old." It was not the elaborate internal narrative that men construct around financial setback that is usually more damaging than the setback itself. What Martin told himself was, "This is where I am. Now, what does the math actually look like from here?" This is a subtler shift than it sounds. Most men who find themselves in Martin's position spend their energy on one of two things: either relitigating the past, the decisions that led here, the money that left, or catastrophizing the future, which is the mental exercise of taking a bad present and projecting it forward unchanged, as though nothing you do between now and the end of your life will have any effect on the outcome. Martin, on that Sunday afternoon, did neither. He pulled out a calculator and he started running the numbers forward. He was 54. He intended to work until at least 65. That was 11 years. His 401k had $170,000. He had not made a contribution in 18 months. His employer offered a 4% match he had been leaving on the table. If he restarted contributions at the maximum rate, which at the time for his age bracket was $26,000 a year, and his employer contributed their match on top of that, and the market returned its historical average of approximately 7%. He ran the numbers 3 times because he was not entirely sure he was doing it right. At 65, the 401k alone would hold approximately $740,000. He read that number again. Then he added his $148,000 in cash, conservatively invested at 5% over 11 years. Another $252,000. Total, approximately $992,000. He had not planned to be a millionaire, he had not planned to need to be, but the number on the paper, at the bottom of a Sunday afternoon calculation, was within sight of the number he had imagined before everything changed. The path back was not comfortable, it was not fast. It required 11 years of discipline from a man who had just watched 2 years of his life and a six-figure sum evaporate. But it was real. The math was real. And Martin understood something in that moment that he would spend the next several years testing. That the most expensive thing he could do with the years he had left was not spend money he did not have. It was waste time he did not have. What Martin did in the 5 years between that Sunday afternoon and today was not glamorous. It was not the kind of story that gets told at dinner parties, and Martin would not tell it at dinner parties even if it were, because he is not that kind of man. It was 7 things, executed consistently and without much drama. 1. He restarted 401k contributions the following Monday. Maximum rate. He did not wait for cash flow to feel comfortable. He treated it as a fixed expense that came out before he saw the money. The employer match began appearing in his account 2 weeks later. He had been leaving that match on the table for 18 months. He does not like to think about how much that cost him. 2. He updated every beneficiary designation within 30 days of that Sunday. His ex-wife had been listed as primary beneficiary on his 401k, his life insurance policy, and a small brokerage account. None of those designations had changed when the divorce was finalized. He discovered this only by checking. 3. He closed every joint account. He was still listed on a credit card that had been opened during the marriage. The card had a 0 balance, but it represented a liability, if his ex-wife had reopened the account and used it, he would have been legally responsible. He closed it within 60 days of the divorce, which was later than he should have. 4. He applied the 30-day rule to every financial decision above $500 for. The first 2 years of the rebuild, not because he did not trust his instincts, but because he had recently discovered that his instincts under certain emotional conditions had cost him $60,000. He gave himself 30 days. The urgency almost never survived 30 days. 5. He moved his $148,000 in cash into a mix of a high-yield savings account and a low-cost index fund, not an attempt to time the market, not a bet on a sector he had been reading about. A. Simple, boring, low-fee allocation that he did not touch for 3 years. 6. He bought back into his employer's stock purchase plan, which he had suspended. The plan allowed him to purchase shares at a 15% discount. This is, functionally, a guaranteed 15% return on the portion of his salary he directed into it. He had stopped contributing to it during the divorce because he needed the cash flow. He restarted it. 7. He wrote 1 document, 1 page. What he had, what he owed, what he brought in, what he needed to live on. He updated it on the first Sunday of every month. He never missed a month. I want to tell you where Martin stands today because I think it matters to tell you the truth of it, not the version that has been tidied up to make a cleaner story. He is 59. He did not return to $800,000. He is at $680,000. His 401k holds $490,000. His brokerage and savings accounts hold approximately $190,000. He drives a 4-year-old truck. He does not eat out as much as he did in 2020, which he regards as a reasonable trade. He will not retire at 62. He will retire at 66, 4 years later than planned. He did not rebuild everything. He rebuilt enough. And this is the part of Martin's story that I think most men in his position do not expect. He built something in the second half that he did not have in the first. Not money, clarity. He knows exactly where his money is. He knows exactly what it costs him to live. He knows exactly what the number needs to be, and he knows exactly when he will reach it. He did not know any of those things at 52. He was comfortable. Comfort, it turns out, has a cost. Martin just didn't know what the invoice looked like until it arrived. Martin's story is not, at its core, about divorce. Divorce was the mechanism. It could have been a business failure, a layoff, a medical event, a decision made in grief or fear or haste. The mechanism changes, the pattern does not. What Martin's story is actually about is the relationship between a man and his financial picture, at the midpoint of his life, and the particular danger that comfort creates. The comfortable man who believes he is on track, who has never run the actual numbers, who has never asked himself what happens to the plan if one of its core assumptions proves to be wrong. Most men in Martin's position before the divorce were making the same mistake Martin was making. Not a financial mistake, a clarity mistake. They had not looked at the actual number, not the approximate sense of it, the actual number, on paper, with all the line items. Because the men who navigated the rebuild fastest, and the research on this is consistent, were not the ones who were most financially sophisticated. They were the ones who did not spend the first year in the story of what had happened to them. Anger does not compound. Invested capital does. And every month a man spends rehearsing the loss is a month of compounding he does not get back. Martin spent about 14 months before he sat down on that Sunday afternoon with a piece of paper. He will tell you those 14 months were the most expensive thing about the divorce. Not the legal fees, not the $60,000, the 14 months. Before you leave this video, I want to ask you one question, and I am going to ask it directly, because that is how we do things here. When did you last look at the actual number? Not your salary, not your rough sense of where you stand. The actual number, what you have, what you owe, what you bring in, and what you need. If you have not done it recently, do it this week. Before anything else. Before the next video, before the next decision. Martin's turning point was not a calculation. It was the act of looking at what was real. That costs nothing. It takes one afternoon. It is the single highest return investment available to any man in any financial position. If this story gave you something real, subscribe. This is the kind of conversation we have here every single week. If you know a man who needs to hear it, send it to him. Do not editorialize, just send it. And drop a comment below, not about Martin, about yourself. When did you last look at the actual number? That is the only question. That matters today. This is The Reserve Man, Wealth, Discipline, the second half.